Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So what I've got for you today is a wildcard video going into Game Week 4. And even if you're not wildcarding, hopefully it helps you out with your transfer thoughts moving forward. I have created all the charts myself. So if you are new to the channel and you do like the style of the video, please do subscribe. We are closing in on 500 subscribers, which for a small channel would be a really cool milestone. And I really do appreciate all the support. We are in the middle of international break, so if there are any injuries, I will pop them in the comments. But if you do have any questions as well, just let me know. I will always get back to you. So let's take a look at the team. And first of all, it is a 95% rated team. Shout out to Fantasy Football Hub. AI rating isn't everything. There's so many nuances and things that the data can't take account for in a football match, but it is good to have a solid rating, just as like a little backup safety net to know that you're on the right tracks. And it does come in at 100 million exactly. Now, if you do already own some of these players and they've gone up in price, you could save some money that way, but it's at least a team that everyone can afford. So in goal, I've gone for David Raya. Now, you might be looking at the fixtures and thinking, why are you getting in an Arsenal player at this stage? But if you're using your wild card now, it means you can't use it in game week 6 when everyone's going to want to start getting in Arsenal players and you won't have that same flexibility. You especially don't want to use a free transfer on a goalkeeper. So if you are wildcarding for game week 4, you do need to plan ahead for the next 12 game weeks. Really, your goalkeeper is someone that you're going to want to have in and stay in your team. He's also the cheapest route into the Arsenal defense, or at least cheap and consistently going to play. You've got your Calafioris and your Timbers, but there's not a guarantee that they're going to start every game. Raya, he's going to start every game, averaging 6 points per game so far. And when we take a look at his data from last season, we can see that his overall points ranks really highly. There's only Sells and Jordan Pickford who got more fantasy league points than him last season. And, showing in a couple of games so far this season, he's also on track to meet that mark. And we have to say that the Arsenal defence looks a lot more consistent than the Everton and the Nottingham Forest. So in defense, I have gone pretty big here, and I'm gonna highlight Murillo. Now, the rest of the defense is Aït-Nouri, Van Dijk. I do quite like their fixtures, but I also think Aït-Nouri is very attacking, and he got really involved in Man City's attack so far. And Van Dijk has hit defensive contributions in pretty much every game. I think so far this season, he got over 20 in game week 1, which is just fantastic to keep topping up your defensive scores. Anderson from Fulham, I also think is a good rotation player. When he's got good fixtures like Leeds at home, you can start him. When he doesn't have good fixtures, that's where Murillo can come in. Now, you might be thinking, why on earth have you got a Nottingham Forest defender in your team? It's at a point where a lot of managers are looking to transfer them out. Well, Nottingham Forest are still a good squad. You can see at the fixtures, game week 5 and game week 6, Burnley and Sunderland back to back. They are great fixtures. So if you own them already, I definitely wouldn't be taking them out at this point. But we also have to look at they're in the international break now, and teams like Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, West Ham, these teams that haven't started very well in the first 3 game weeks, they've kind of got a break. The international break, a lot of teams that are doing well, they don't like it. But these teams that have started poorly, they kind of get a bit of a reset. They all go their separate ways for the international games, and then they come back and it's like a fresh start. So I would expect, you know, teams like Nottingham Forest to, you know, kind of get their act together a little bit. Now, we've seen players like Murillo last season rank really highly for FPL points per game, but also in defensive actions. Now, team like Nottingham Forest, they will keep clean sheets. They're not going to keep zero clean sheets all season. In fact, the most clean sheets that anyone kept last season were like Everton and Arsenal teams who kept about 12 to 13 clean sheets. And that's why I'm staying away from Tottenham defenders because, people are getting in Tottenham defenders because they got 2 clean sheets out of the first 3 games. And really, if the maximum clean sheets any team is going to get is 13, that kind of means that Spurs are only going to keep 11 clean sheets maximum in the next 35 game weeks. Whereas a team like Nottingham Forest, who are proven to keep clean sheets, If they haven't kept any yet, then chances are they are overdue. FPL is all about, can you get ahead of the curve? Can you get these players in? So I wouldn't be put off that, a lot of people are transferring out Nottingham Forest defenders. I think it's a really good time to get on them. I'm not worried about European football. I think, if anything, it's going to give them more chance to play together. They'll probably be playing weaker teams than they would be playing in the Premier League, and it'll get their confidence up. And to be honest, about half the teams in the Premier League have European football this season. So if we were going to be really selective about not going for players who have, European fixtures, we'd be really struggling to get out a good team. So into midfield, and there's nothing too crazy here. We've gone for some high upside players. We've of course gone for Mo Salah, Kudus, and Grealish. All three have started the season either well, or in Salah's case, he started okay. He's kind of scraped some points together, but I think you do need some big hitters in this team. I've decided to highlight Dango here from uh, Brentford. Now, for me, after his transfer from Bournemouth, whilst it's not been, completely seamless, I do think that he is one of these high upside players that you can get in on the cheap. And he's one of these midfielders who's playing really far forwards. He's almost playing as a striker. When we take a look at his data from last season, we can see he is rated here in terms of points per game versus starts. Feel free to pause the video at any point, to take a closer look at some of these charts. I appreciate some of them might be difficult to read from a distance away or on a phone, but this is his data from last season. He didn't start a lot of games. Now, he looks here that he's in the middle of the group. There's nothing special about Dango Ouattara in this data, it would seem. But he's one of these players who's had a change of situation. The transfer window is shut. Brentford, they don't have a ton of forward options, and I do think Dango will start improving. We look at, this is sort of his comparison to players at his price at 6 million, and given a few more starts, you would expect his points to continue to increase. If you look across the board, you're looking for, there's not really anyone that much higher than Dango Ataro based on last season's data. Now he's going to be getting more starts and more of a focal point of Brentford team. I can see him being a really undervalued pick if you're on a wild card. No one's really talking about him at 6 million, and I think he is a great pick. So up front, we've gone for Watkins, Gyökeres, and João Pedro. Now, I would be aware of players like João Pedro. I just double check their international schedule. Players that are flying to the furthest corners of the globe. When are they due back? I wouldn't be too surprised if I see João Pedro on the bench against Brentford, but I think he is absolutely worth getting in. Even from an FPL point of view, do I think he can keep it going? Possibly. I've never been a huge fan of FPL of João Pedro. I just think he's just not as consistent. But now he's in a Chelsea team where he will be the focal point at 7.7 million. I'm not bothered about the price rises. I think, if you look at a price that he is now at 7.7 million and you think, well, if he'd started the season at 7.7, would I be getting him in? If the answer is yes, you've not missed out on anything. These price rises only change and only make a difference when it prices you out of someone that you want. So I've gone for Gyökeres as well. Now he is someone new into the league, and a bit like David Raya, I think you need to get on him now. I wouldn't get in any of the other Arsenal attackers or midfielders. I just think there's too much rotation there, whereas I do expect Gyökeres to be starting and finishing most of the games. Now, I've highlighted Ollie Watkins here again, another player that a lot of people are taking out of their teams. He's even dropped down in price, but a bit like Mario from Nottingham Forest, do we expect Ollie Watkins to finish on 0 goals and 0 assists? Absolutely not. Do we think Aston Villa aren't going to score a goal for the rest of the season? No, of course not. They're going to score goals. And Ollie Watkins is someone who, 4 out of the last 5 seasons, has got at least 14 goals and at least 8 assists. He is really involved in everything that Aston Villa do. And now the transfer window is shut, they have got some more, attacking options in terms of wide players and midfielders, but there's not really anyone who can challenge Ollie Watkins for that number 9 role. And I just think now the window's shut, there's going to be less disruption, for the Aston Villa squad. They will just be one of these teams that reset and it will sort of deviate to the norm. A lot of players who overperform their XG or teams that outperform their expected goals, they sometimes have a bit of a drop off. And likewise, teams that are underperforming their expected goals, he will surely increase the actual goals and therefore meet the norm that we are expecting. So when we take a look at the strikers data from last season, we're looking at bonus points versus goal contributions. Now, obviously, if you were to get up this season's data, Ollie Watkins wouldn't look great, but I wanted to show last season's just because good players don't turn bad overnight. And especially with the good fixtures coming up, we can see Ollie Watkins circled here. He is just involved in goals and he gets a lot of bonus points as well, which means that if he does score or get an attacking return for Aston Villa, it's usually a significant one, and therefore he's getting the bonus points as well. The players that you're looking who are doing better than him in terms of these stats this for last season, Johan Visser, Alexander Isak, they've had no game time. They're going to take a lot of time to get up and running. And Chris Wood is someone who, for Nottingham Forest, whilst I think their defence is going to get a lot more solid, I don't necessarily see them scoring a ton of goals. They are a team who outperformed their expected goals massively last season. And I would think as the time period gets even greater, that will slow down and they may struggle to replicate that this season. But for Ollie Watkins, someone who's proven in the Premier League year after year, I definitely wouldn't be taking him out at this point. I know it's easier said than done, and I know a lot of people will be frustrated, but I think he's a player that has just so proven in the Premier League. He is going to score sooner rather than later, and it is worth just hanging on or even getting in on a wild card. Imagine you get him in, everyone else has taken him out, and now he starts scoring points. It's a bit like this Spurs clean sheets. He's going to start scoring you goals at some point in the near future. So when we take a look at the strengths, I think the strengths of playing a wild card right now is it obviously prepares for future fixtures. I think you definitely need to look ahead of the next 3 weeks, and that's why we're getting in some Arsenal players, and it gets ahead of the points. FPL is all about can you get these players in before they start scoring points or very early into their point scoring run. There's no point getting in a player who has scored a ton of points previously. Like Jack Grealish, even though I think he is a good option, do I think he's going to get 2 assists every game for the rest of the season? No. So that is a player that's maybe a bit of a risk in terms of your expectations. Like Haaland last season, I think he got, 8 goals in his first 5 games or something, or 10 in his first five. He's never going to be able to keep that going. So it's like after they've happened, he probably will go on a bit of a downturn. But I do think this team does have some depth in it where you can rotate players in and out. So the weaknesses for me is there's a chance that there's too much up front here. So I've invested heavily in the strikers in this wildcard team, and I'll be interested to see what you think of that. I think having a lot of money up front, it does mean that there's not another premium midfield. And I think you could also argue that there's too much money in defence as well, having two premium defenders. I think they are defenders that are worth getting, and we've still gone for the most expensive goalkeeper or joint most expensive goalkeeper. But hopefully, it makes sense that we've gone for him as the cheapest way and most consistent way into the Arsenal defence. I think as well, whilst the bench is okay, it is a little bit weaker. If you think you started Mario instead of Anderson, you've got Fulham and Sunderland defenders on the bench, a Burnley goalkeeper, and a cheap West Ham midfielder. But that is someone who, Potts, he has actually played so far this season. So I think that is something that's worth, acknowledging as we move forward is are your bench players playing? If they are, get them in. I have also gone for a Sunderland and a defender and a Burnley goalkeeper. I think it's important to spread along those promoted teams because when they're playing at home, I think you can start them. When they're playing away, I think you bench them. And therefore, if they're both playing for the same team and therefore they're away at the same time, it does weaken your bench all that more. So let me know what you think. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Are you on a wild card? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on this team and your thoughts on your own transfer plans as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.